So we are delighted to have you here, and it gives us a great opportunity to discuss this bill, which we believe is long overdue, and are very appreciative to Bríd Smith for bringing it forward. It gives us an opportunity to create a greater awareness around why this bill is so important. Today, we have with us a couple of organisations who are part of a larger grouping who are truly supporting this bill and wish to see it go through. So I'm Susan Shaw, and I'm the CEO of the Irish Senior Citizens Parliament, and delighted to host this bill, as we have long called for the opportunity to redress the right of redress for pensioners in relation to their pension provision. A key consideration for our members, and indeed all of the panelists here today, is the lack of voice in decisions made around pension and pension plans. We believe strongly that to be absent from the table, as pensioners are, is wrong, was always wrong, and will continue to be wrong. This is the opportunity to ensure that this bill goes through and addresses that serious gap. We believe strongly from our conversations that most TDs and indeed parties believe in the right of older people and pensioners to have a say in what is a crucial element, their income in their later years, having worked all their life to ensure that they have adequate provision. So to see that changed, interfered with, or in any way managed without their say is something that we as a parliament can't support, and I don't think any of our members here speaking on behalf of their associations can. So I am going to, today who we have with us, obviously Bríd Smith, TD, who has proposed this bill, is going to open up the conversation. We also have Mick Casey from the National Federation of Retired Pensioners. We have Martin Hoy from the Alliance of Retired Public Servants, Tony Collins from the ESB Retired Association, and our own Imelda Brown, who is Vice President of the Irish Senior Citizens Parliament and is a member of the INMO, who is supporting this bill. So I'm going to hand you over to our first speaker, who is Bríd, and at the end of all speakers, we will then open the floor to obviously questions. We will really encourage you to ask questions, to give yourself greater clarity, and we will do our best to answer them and create that awareness, because our primary aim is to ensure that your party and that you as people support this bill going through the Dáil tomorrow. So I'll hand you over to Bríd Smith.
Hi Susan, and hi everybody. I'm delighted to be here and delighted to be coming to the day when we're going to present the bill to the Dáil. First thing I'd like to do is just move over and let you have a look at the banner we got made for we're having a press event, a sort of a protest outside Leinster House at 2 o'clock tomorrow. And I hope there's no, well, there probably will be some associations missing, but not the ones that we got the logos for. So just have a look, it looks well. I don't know if it reads backwards on the screen's reading backwards for me, but and we also got several placards done, give retired workers a voice, and most importantly for this session, well, I hope that there's some parliamentarians here, retired workers are not retired voters. It's a very important slogan that you guys have put together on this issue. I want to thank Susan and the Senior Citizens Parliament for hosting this important webinar. In the last few years of the last Dáil before the 2020 election, there were frequently protests of retired workers groups outside Leinster House, and myself and Owen McCormick, who's here with me, and those of you will know that Owen has done a huge amount of work on this bill, along with, and I have to commend them for it, members of the OPLA, which is the legal service where we can access here in the Dáil. They've done great work and they've really done a thorough job on it. And I want to preempt this, particularly for the attention of political parties and deputies and senators who may want to know this. We would love to see this bill pass on Wednesday or whenever the vote is taken to committee stage, and we are wide open to amendments at committee stage. So anybody who reads this bill and sees holes or problems with it, please do support it in order to go to committee to point that out and to be able to amend it. So I just want to thank those retired workers who did protest frequently outside Leinster House for drawing our attention to this and for pursuing it relentlessly. I've been very impressed with them and have got to know many of the representatives of your associations over the last couple of years, and it's been a pleasure, continues to be a pleasure to work with you. So I just want to say a few words about what the point of this bill is. First of all, to acknowledge that over the last decade or more, there has been a general war on pensions, on pensioners and retired workers. And indeed, the very idea of a stable pension being guaranteed you when you retired is now seen as unrealistic. The fact that the right to retire at 65 has been removed, and that pension schemes for decades in private pensions and public sector are considered as cosseted and privileged and have been under attack. Where this all started from the point of view of semi-state and public sector workers was going back to the bank bailout, which was a real marker in terms of the rights of retired workers. And many retired workers found that in 2011 and beyond, the traditional link with their wages of their ex-colleagues was severed, and many haven't seen a rise in their pensions for over 10 years. While costs have risen, the cost of living, the cost of rent, the cost of food, the cost of travel, everything rises, but the pensions haven't. And very often deals were struck with pensions that had profound and negative impact on the retired workers. And that's why, as Susan said, retired workers have had no voice when these things happen. And we should remember the slogan, nothing about us without us. And that's why People Before Profit are bringing the bill, the Industrial Relations Amendment Bill, to the Dáil on June the 30th. We want to give these retired workers a voice. We know this will not address this systematic attack on pensions, but it will at least give a voice and the right to representation of retired workers and their associations. And this is most appropriate after a life of these people in building with their trade union movements, the voice for workers. Retired workers, as I say, are not retired voters, and they still have rights. So we want these workers and their representative associations to have access to the workplace relations commissions when their occupational schemes are being affected, or any proposed changes that are being made could affect their benefits. If these changes happen more than 6 months after worker retires, they have no rights to access the WRC. And this bill would mean that retired workers have the right to consultation prior to any changes that would impact on their pensions. And there are other measures there to strengthen workers' access to the Board of Trustees, and it would change the definition of a trade dispute to include changes to a pension scheme of retired workers. Between 2011 and 2018, retired public sector workers, and this is to me is an astounding figure, saw the state take over 700 million euro directly from their pensions. And in the same period, workers who weren't retired, in other words, their colleagues still working, paid an extra 2 billion in pension contributions for reduced benefits. So, and it's worth saying that the largest group of public sector pensioners are now only earning less than 10,000 euro a year. Of the almost 100,000 public sector pensioners, they all earn less than 25,000 euro a year in their pensions, which really blows a hole in this idea that they have gold-plated pensions. And in the case of the non-commercial semi-state bodies, more money was actually contributed by the employees toward their pension scheme in 2008 than was paid out to pensioners. So I'll just summarise the bill, and then I'll leave you and leave the meeting open. First of all, what is the bill trying to do? And that is to improve the rights of retired workers to consultation when any proposed changes are being made to their occupational pension schemes. How does it do this? It amends the Industrial Relations Act to give retired workers greater access to the WRC and provide for them to be consulted if any changes are proposed in their schemes. How many retired workers does this affect? We're talking about over 500,000 retired workers in occupational pension schemes. A large number of retired workers are organised into various associations and federations, and these represent significant numbers of pensions. The Alliance, for example, says it represents over 140,000 pensioners. The organisational strength mirrors the previous workplace participation, where many of these retired workers were trade union activists, and their occupational schemes are tied to their previous workplace, many of which are semi-state or public sector companies and bodies. So why is the bill needed? Well, since retiring, we've found that deals have been done with previous employers and trade unions that have had detrimental effects on pensions. In some cases, direct cuts in benefits, in others, no increases for 10 years. And in others, again, the traditional link between wages and pensions have been completely severed. And in all cases, the retired cohort were ignored by their employers and their trade unions. In theory, they can seek redress from the WRC, but as I've said, this is limited to the worker who has left the workplace to within 6 months. Otherwise, they can take cases to the Pensions Authority or the Pensions Ombudsman as individuals. So we think this is hugely politically important and absolutely materially important for retired workers. But I'd like to emphasise something to all workers, and it's not just retired workers whom this will benefit if it goes through. It's the current workforce. And the current workforce should see it as having a big stake in the outcome of this bill to their future. And indeed, the current workforce, and I know many of them in my family, are particularly affected because it is harder for them to get decent accommodation. Wages are being kept lower, and that link that has been severed between their wages and their pensions is really going to hurt them very badly when they retire. Just to finish up, I thank everybody for attending and welcome any questions, any technical questions. I'll do my best to answer, but I would like to emphasize yet again to everybody participating that should this bill go through, we are very open to amendments being taken at committee. Thank you very much, Susan, and everybody else. I'll put myself on mute now.
Thanks, Bríd. And I think a key point is the reality of the fact that many workers contributing to their occupational pension now realize that with the lack of steady increase being linked to the cost of living, the only cushion that is afforded to them is that occupational pension, and to see that in any way affected without their voice is crucial. So that's a really key point, and to point out that that's over 500,000 people is something we all need to keep in mind. I'd now like to introduce Michael Casey, who is from the National Federation of Pensioners Association, and he's going to give us a couple of minutes on why their association is strongly supporting this. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Sue. We've been trying for the last eight or 9 years to get the details of the previous bill back in the 1970s that Michael O'Leary abolished, and we couldn't gain access. But we've been looking for this right to arbitration for as long as I know my federation, and we represent both public and private sector, and we support Bríd's bill. We've been in contact with her since the 1st of October 2019, and we found it a great help. And like all my members have been hit badly. Like ESB, of which I'm a member, has had the Michael Noonan's bill took to 96 million off our scheme. The same with Aircom and a lot of other affiliates of my federation. So thank you, Sue, for the chance to speak.
Delighted, Mick. Thank you very much. I'd now like to follow up with Martin Hoy, who represents the Alliance of Retired Public Servants. There you go, Martin.
Thank you, Sue. I'll say a few brief words about the Alliance. Bríd mentioned earlier that we claim to represent 140,000 plus retirees in the public service. And yes, that is true. And there are about 21 organizations affiliated to us. The Alliance was formed as a result of essentially the cuts that came in under FEMPI back around 2013. And it had essentially three planks, three main aims. And one of those was negotiating rights. The other aims were pension parity with our serving colleagues. In other words, that we would remain, our pensions would remain linked to the pay of our serving peers. And the third one was full pension restoration. Now, pension restoration is being taken care of for just about everybody as we speak. There's it has been taken care of for most people. Pension parity is, shall we say, a movable feast at the moment. We have it until the end of 2022, but only because the final unwinding of FEMPI is taking until 2022 to happen. The business of negotiating rights, this goes back in when Minister Howland, or when Deputy Howland was Minister for Public Expenditure, he did actually meet representatives of the Alliance on one occasion. But we have sought further meetings. We saw and have been denied those meetings. However, Minister McGrath has committed to meeting us, but that meeting, for example, we were promised that meeting as far back as last September. It hasn't happened. So it's very difficult to get access to impress upon ministers the importance of representation. We as Bríd has said, that phrase, about us, without us, is absolutely untenable in today's world. Pensioners are citizens, they have rights. They have, under the EU Charter of Human Rights, we are entitled to representation. We are entitled to fair play. And there would be a body of opinion there that says the government has actually broken the EU Charter by denying negotiating rights. All current trade union legislation fails to recognize the term pensioner. It's like as if we are bees. When we stop working, we're gone, we're dead. Well, we're not. We're here, and we are entitled to representation and consultation. And the amendments which Bríd is proposing will go a very, very long way towards sorting that issue. Let me see, what have I got here? Pensions are a property right, and under FEMPI, our pensions were levied. We're told we weren't cut; we were levied, but whereas they have been restored to former levels, no compensation was given to any worker or any retiree for the loss, for the monies lost. And pensioners lost tens of thousands over the period before the restoration started, and even while the restoration, when it started in 2016, 17 and 18 and completed in 2020. I won't go into how much was lost. So a colossal amount of money was taken out of our pockets in that time, and no concession by government, no recognition that this was wrong. It's like, okay, you're public service pensioners, you're a soft target, we'll take your pensions and we won't give it back to you ever. That's what has happened. Now, it's so important that every TD understands what's at stake here. To deny the right of representation would be a terrible slap in the teeth, a very retrograde step. For example, the leader of Fine Gael, Leo Varadkar, only 10 days ago or so, said in a speech that he wanted to see greater access to pensions. Well, let Fine Gael put their money where their mouth is, and this will not cost them. To pass these amendments will not cost anything, essentially. It's representation to correct wrongs if there are wrongs done, and to help pensioners get a fair crack at the whip. So how can a party that purports to support greater access to pensions deny representations to pensioner bodies? Now, Bríd mentioned that under existing legislation, a pensioner can make a claim, but it has to be within 6 months if they have a grievance of 6 months of them retiring. no representation rights exist for any organisation representing pensioners. The Act would give that right. Mick Casey just a few minutes ago talked about the value, the money that was taken out of their pensions, by how much their pension funds were cut. The pension levy was abused by the pension trustees or pension managers completely. The cuts to pensions was totally out of proportion with the 0.6% levy that the government took from the pension funds. It was totally out of proportion and a terrible abuse. That cannot be allowed ever to happen again. Now, likewise, you know, I wondered when I heard early last year about this virus and what it was going to do to the economy. I says, oh gosh, we're in for another Fentby. Well, let there never be another Fentby. It is wrong to penalise pensioners who have given their lives working for the state and for semi-states and whatever. We deserve our pensions. We have paid for our pensions. We pay for them twice over in ways. We pay all our indirect taxes. We pay our direct taxes. And while we're working, in the income tax we pay, because pensions are paid out of current budgets, we're paying the pensions of those already retired, and we're contributing to our pensions likewise in our superannuation contributions and spouse and dependents contributions. So that is a situation, you know, even as pensioners, if we're in the tax bracket, we're still paying for our own pensions as we get our pensions. That's essentially all I want to say. I'm adamant that this is the best chance we've ever had, and I want to express my thanks and the thanks of the Alliance to Bríd for taking the initiative and getting these acts, getting them put together, getting these amendments put together. And I sincerely hope that politicians are taking this seriously and are prepared to support the amendments going forward to committee stage. It's vitally important. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. You know, I think sometimes one of the difficulties is that in writing letters or having conversations through email with TDs, I don't think the passion and the strength of feeling that exists among older people is truly felt. And Martin, I think you really represented that for us, so thank you. I'd like to ask Tony now if he'd like to come in. So Tony is, sorry, Tony. So Tony Collins is with the ESB Retired Association, and he has some points he would really like to make.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you to the ISCP for hosting this webinar. I suppose as an organisation, ESB Retired Staff Association, our journey began in this back 10 years ago, 2011. And it was through the good offices of your predecessors, Sue, of Mairead Hayes, that organised a meeting with the department, officials in the Department of Social Protection. And I was one of a group of about 4 or 5 people who were representing semi-state organisations at that meeting. And that's where it sort of started for us. And we then took up our own correspondence with the various departments. We had meetings with Minister Varadkar at the time when he was Minister for Social Protection, subsequently then Regina Doherty. We've also had meetings with Micheál Martin as leader of the opposition at the time. And we've had several protests, both outside ESB and outside Leinster House, and Bríd herself has attended those protests and has spoken at those protests. So between correspondence and all of the actions that we've taken to try and change legislation, because we have written about the very things, you know, that are in that very, very good document that Owen has produced, you know, which is the definitions in the Industrial Relations Bill and so on. We have written about those time after time to successive ministers, and successive governments haven't had the political will to actually initiate any changes on our behalf. I suppose other avenues that we explored were the setting up of the retired semi-state group, of which ESB RSA is a member. And the seeds for that were actually sown way back, many years back, with a number of ladies from RTE who met Matt Kelly and myself to just to explore ways we could cooperate together. And one of those was Linda Sherlock. May she rest in peace. She's died recently. She was a great help, and Mairead the Butler. So that sort of set the seeds for the actual semi-state group, which is made up of many semi-state organisations, such as CIE, Board Namona, ERCOM. There are many there. I'm sure many are listening to this, are participating in this webinar. And could I just mention practical examples of one of the things that Bríd mentioned was the 6-month law, the law that's in the Pensions and Industrial Relations Acts, where you cannot actually have take a grievance once you're retired more than 6 months. Well, we had a very practical example of that when we took a case to the Equality Tribunal many years ago as our own organisation, and it was against the trustees of our scheme and the company ESB. It was to do with the pensions levy, which has already been mentioned. And the trustees had imposed the levy on the pensioners. And our case, we never even got the opportunity to actually present our substantive case, because it fell down on the actual law, in the Pensions Act and in the Industrial Relations Act, that we were more than 6 months retired. So it actually fell down on the point of legal technicality. So that's a prime example of how we have actually come up against that, as I say, in practice. Again, there are many examples from our own organisation, from ESB, where the discussions have taken place between the group of unions and ESB, the company, on pension matters, to the exclusion of representatives of the retired workers. And that has happened over the last 10 years. And a prime example of that, in fact, it was actually 11 years ago in 2010, was a pension agreement on pension matters between the group of unions and the company that excluded the pensioners and retired workers from those discussions. And the measures that were introduced in that agreement are affecting us to this very day. One of them, which has already been mentioned by Bríd as well, the break in the link with the salaries of the serving staff. So that was broken in that agreement. So formerly, prior to 2010, we would have had increases in line with the increases in salaries. And we effectively have a pension freeze on us for that length of time, for 11 years. So they are practical examples of how pensioners or retired former workers have been excluded from discussions. And there have been many examples over in that intervening period where agreements have been made with the staff and to the exclusion of the former workers. So could I just also mention the fact somebody had mentioned there, the government trying to have a pension scheme for all. There have been proposals by government to have an auto-enrolment scheme for pensions, and this was first proposed by Regina Doherty when she was minister. Now, if they're going to have an auto-enrolment scheme and encourage people to become auto-enrolled for pensions, they'd want to literally get their act together and give existing pensioners the right to actually defend their pensions. So that is where government need to get their ducks in a row as such. They need to actually get their priorities right. Give the former workers a voice. Give them access to the WRC, which is so important. I mean, as I say, this bill, which has, and Bríd, by the way, has listened, the only one that has actually listened to former workers, and as I say, has been at our protests. And I must thank Bríd and our colleagues for the work that they've put into this, because this is the culmination of, we'll say, our activities over the last decade and many other organisations. So it's so important, and I think it's important. And if there are TDs and senators listening to this or participating in this webinar, I think it is important that an all-party approach should be taken on this, not just that this is so important for former workers, and that they need a voice, they have a right to it. So we cannot have discussions on our matters related to our pensions, taking place without us. So, I think I'll finish on that. I think I've said enough. And again, thanks to Bríd and thanks to Sue for hosting this. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Tony. And I think, again, that you just can't reiterate enough that individually all of our organisations have campaigned throughout the years. As you say, Mairead Hayes, our former CEO, it was a bugbear for her on behalf of our members, and we have continued, as have all of the organisations here today, to individually campaign. And I think at this point, the collective approach is where we are going with, and we think it will give us some more clout. Tom O'Connor, listening in, has reminded us of the protest around the over 70s medical card, which the Senior Parliament were crucial in organising. And that protest was massive. We would strongly believe there is no need to go to those lengths, and shouldn't be a need to go back to those lengths to achieve what is a basic right. The right to be consulted over what is your income that you have contributed to, and the say in how it is managed. So just for our last speaker, could I invite Imelda Brown to wrap us up? And you're very welcome, Imelda.
Thank you, Sue. Hi, my name is Imelda Brown, and I am the Vice President of the Irish Senior Citizens Parliament, but I am elected to the Irish Senior Citizens Parliament from the INMO Active Retirement Group. And I think Michael has already touched on the fact that there is a huge risk that the link with current salaries could go. As we all know, productivity and changes in work practice has been used in latter years in order to give increases. And it is also being used as an excuse not to give these increases to pensioners. And I see this as a huge issue down the line, that we could be excluded because naturally the fact that we're retired is where we can't change our work practices. So whereas I have no problem with that, I can understand there's improvements needed in services, but it should not be used as a way of excluding pensioners from having their pensions linked to salaries. Because I was nursing, and as everybody knows, in the 70s and 80s, this was largely a female occupation, the vast majority of retired nurses of my age and older do not have full occupational pensions, due to the fact that many of them took, easily 10, 15 years off to rear families when there were very little other choices available to them. Therefore, they do not have full occupational pensions. So maintaining the value of the amount of pension they have is of the utmost importance to them. And I think we've already touched on the fact that I do not really think the politicians realise how much anger there will be if this does not change. And as an organisation, we are basically looking for, for people to be aware of the 5 big differences this will make to us. As Bríd has already said, many people are not aware that once they are 6 months retired, you have absolutely no access to the WRC. This bill will change that. We are not consulted when there are talks going on between trade unions and employees that affect our pensions. You may be lucky and you may be with a trade union, that remembers the retired workers and fights hard for them. You may not be. But we do not want this to be luck. We want it to be our right. Therefore, we must support this bill. It also would give us the right that retired pensioners would be on positions of trustees on boards. It can be difficult now for retired workers to have their voices heard. You may get retired workers on certain boards, but not as retired workers protecting retired people. And we need to see this where it's important. And basically, I think because most of us would have been active trade union members, and we were all involved in the WRC and trade disputes and all of that. But because we are pensioners, any issues we have with our pension rights are not seen as industrial disputes. You know, we're kind of like somebody said, once we are retired, it wipes out your whole background in fighting for your rights and being an active trade union member. And this bill will give us back some of those rights. And I think we need to make all of our members just so aware of what we have to lose if this bill does not go forward. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Imelda. And thank you to all of the speakers.